everyone, and thank you for your interest in learning more about the Social Work Licensure Compact. We think this is an important development for the social work profession, and we're excited to have the opportunity to share it with you today. I'm Keith Buckout. I'm a research associate for the Council of State Governments. I'm joined today by the director of the National Center for Interstate Compacts, Matt Schaefer, and policy associate for CSG, Grant Nix. Along with a team of stakeholders in the profession, CSG has been engaged in developing the Social Work Licensure Compact for just over a year now, and we're excited to share the initial draft with you today. Before we, I think I may have skipped a slide there. Before we get into the specifics of the Social Work Licensure Compact, we do want to share a little bit about who we are at the Council of State Governments. So CSG is a national membership organization for elected and appointed state officials. We're the only organization serving all three branches of state government, and we support our members through providing policy research, technical assistance and analysis, and convening our members to learn from one another. In 2004, CSG launched a policy program aimed at helping states collaborate and develop solutions to multi-state problems called the National Center for Interstate Compacts. You can see on the slide, NCIC is a research-based and member-driven technical assistance center, which facilitates the consideration, creation, and revision of interstate compacts as solutions to multi-state problems. NCIC has also facilitated the development or consulted on the development of all of the active occupational licensing compacts. So before we get into the specifics of the Social Work Compact, we probably need to start with what is an interstate compact. There's three things that it's important to know. It's a constitutionally authorized, legislatively enacted, legally binding contract between two or more states. That legislatively enacted part is especially important. Compacts can be used to administer regulations that govern multiple states. And the best example of that type of interstate compact is the photo you see there on the slide, a driver's license. A driver's license is issued by a home state, but it authorizes the holder to drive in every other state. And that's because there's a driver's license compact. Since 2016, NCIC has been actively working with states and licensed professions to develop occupational licensing interstate compacts. Compacts create a streamlined pathway for licensed professionals to practice in multiple states rather than having to maintain licenses in multiple states. So it's that first box up at the top left that facilitates multi-state practice. It's important to note that this doesn't remove the power of each state to issue single state licenses with whatever requirements they deem fit, but this is an additional pathway where a licensed practitioner can practice in compact member states without having to go through each individual member state's licensure process. As you can see at the bottom, there are some statistics describing the utilization of these compacts, and as you can see, they've been very popular in recent years and are a proven tool. There are currently 9 active occupational licensing interstate compacts, the most popular of which is the Nursing Compact, which was the first out the door in 2016, and that is actually a revision of an original Nursing Compact that was drafted in 1999 and 2000. We'll talk about why that's important a little later on. I do want to note that the compacts with lower membership numbers are not necessarily any less popular. They're generally just newer. These compacts can take a little bit of time to gain momentum towards the state enactments, and so sometimes it just takes some time to get the ball rolling. These are the new compacts that CSG is currently working to develop. Except for the compact for physician assistants, the other professions listed here are being developed under a cooperative agreement between CSG and the Department of Defense. You may be asking yourself, why does the Department of Defense care about something like occupational licensure? And it's because there's many military families who have one spouse or one family member who are engaged in a licensed profession. And as you can imagine, let's say, for instance, you are married to an active duty service member, but the Department of Defense can reassign the active duty service member to a new duty station on average every 2 to 3 years. And so if you can imagine having to go through a new licensure process every 2 to 3 years, in addition to finding a new job, can make even just being employed, not even just growing in your career, very, very difficult. And so the Department of Defense partnered with us here at CSG to create these occupational licensing interstate compacts. And it's important to note that these don't just benefit military spouses or military families. There are provisions that are specific to active duty military families, and Matt will discuss those later, but these compacts are open to all licensees of the profession. Let's see. It's best that we spend a little bit of time talking about the compact development process before we get into the actual compact itself. So this slide has a lot of information. I'm not going to read it all to you, I promise. We do want to focus on that left-hand column under phase 1 development. And so one thing that CSG hears from its members a lot is that they can vote for a bill that might not be an individual's ideal of the policies that go into a bill. Lots of times they hear from their constituents that say, you know, this bill might be an important step forward, but it'd be a lot better if I had this provision, or it would be a lot better if it didn't have this provision, or I really don't support this draft, but if we could go back and try again, or maybe we could revise it later, that'd be great. And our legislators will tell us that they can still vote for bills that they may not be supported on a individual policy level, but legislators do tell us that they cannot ever support a bill that is developed under a closed process where they say it was written by special interests in a back room, and I've never seen it and I haven't had a chance to comment on it. And so CSG is committed to developing these compacts in an open and transparent process. That being said, we can't include every single social worker, every single state board administrator, state board member, state board staff, social work educator all in the room to write this at one time. That's just too many people, unfortunately. So what we do is we develop that first group called the Technical Assistance Group, and it's a group of about 20 to 25 experts who are responsible for developing sort of the foundation and the frame for the compact draft. And so if you think about it like drafting a house, this group studies all of the licensure requirements in all of the states and territories, and then sort of lays the foundation, which is the model, this is a mutual recognition model on which the compact can be built. And then they develop the provisions and the policies that they think are important for the social work profession. And that sort of frames up the structure of the bill. And then that group hands off those recommendations in that model to the document team. You'll see that in that second set of bullets there. And that is a much smaller group, about 5 to 8 experts. Some are state board officials who are very familiar with the text of sort of scope of practice acts and legislation and regulatory language. And there's also some attorneys and issue experts that help us basically take that recommendation and that framework, and then they put pen to paper and develop the draft we're going to review today. And so now that we've reached that final bullet in the compact document team section where it says circulate draft compact to states and stakeholder groups for comment, we're engaged in stakeholder review, and that's really what this meeting is about. So to present the provisions of the bill and offer more information, and then give folks a chance to ask some questions about things that they might not be familiar or concerns they might have. And so with that, I'll talk a little bit about the stakeholder review process and then hand it over to Matt. So as I mentioned, we went through the technical assistance group process. We went through the compact document team process. And now that we have a draft, we've published that draft on the project website. Hopefully you've had time to visit that website, review the draft, maybe develop some questions. And then now that you're in this meeting, we're hosting these virtual meetings to go through section by section, because some of this is pretty technical language, and explain what each section means so that everybody has a good grasp, and then offer a chance for people to ask questions and raise concerns at the end. But that being said, we also want to make sure that everybody has a chance to have their voice be heard. And so we've set up a public survey through SurveyMonkey that's linked on that project website that I mentioned. And through that, you can go through and it asks about all of the provisions that are really relevant to the profession, that aren't just legal boilerplate language that have to be included to make the thing work. you can go through and offer your comments and feedback on each of those provisions, and we encourage you to do that. But after a few weeks of this, because it just can't last forever, we'll reconvene that document team and the compact development teams that you see in item 4 on the slide to consider everyone's feedback, and then discuss all the comments and then edit and review the document as necessary. So we intend to do that in the coming weeks, and then if there's substantive changes to the draft, then we'll go out for another round of stakeholder review and let people re-examine the document, see if the changes were made for the better, say, yes, this is what this document needed. Actually, we preferred it the other way. Or if there weren't substantive revisions to the document at that time will be locked and released to states for consideration and enactment. And so with that, I'm going to hand things over to Matt, who will walk us through the specific provisions and the language itself and highlight some information that'll be relevant to the group. So with that, Matt, take it away.
Thank you, Keith. Good afternoon, everybody. Like Keith said, my name is Matt Schaefer with the Council of State Governments. I'm the Deputy Policy Director in our CSG National Center for Interstate Compacts. And like Keith said, going to be going over the draft social work compact with you today. We're going to focus the majority of our time on the front half of the document, which is mostly the provisions related to social work, and then we're going to move a little bit more quickly through the back half, which is more just compact administration and governance generally. So we're going to start in section 1, which is the purpose statement. And the purpose statement is usually important to legislators to be able to point to and say, this is the objective of this piece of legislation, and this is what we're trying to achieve here. Some states remove the purpose statement because they don't think it's necessary in order to implement the provisions of the compact, but most of the time legislators like to keep this in here. So you can see here the list. This compact is designed to achieve the following objectives. We talk about increasing access to social work services, protecting public health and safety. Keith mentioned the point about military families. DoD really likes interstate compacts, and that's why they're funding this. Facilitating cooperation amongst the member states, exchange of information, allowing for telehealth. The document team wanted to have a specific point here about telehealth since that's so prevalent in social work. Supporting uniformity of requirements, and then lastly, promoting mobility and addressing workforce shortages. So if you have any additional objectives that you would like to see included here, or you feel like any of these are could be worded better, then would invite you to fill out the survey like Keith mentioned. Section 2 is the definitions, and there's a lot of definitions here. I'd encourage you to review these on your own time. We're just going to talk about a few of the definitions here today that are specific to social work. Okay, so the first definition I want to point out is definition R, which is interstate compact license. You can see here in line 90. So this is the thing that the social worker is applying to receive that authorizes them to practice in all of the other member states that are a part of the compact. So like Keith's example with the driver's license, you hold one driver's license, and that grants you the ability to drive anywhere in the country. It's a similar concept here where you hold one interstate compact license, and that authorizes you to practice in any of the other member states that are a part of the compact. We say here that it's issued by the home state licensing authority. So you will apply to your home state's licensing board, and your home state will be the one that issues you the interstate compact license. Now you may be wondering, what is my home state? Is that where I live? Is that where I hold my license? And that's a very common question that we've been getting so far through this process. And the way that this compact is set up, and we'll talk about this more, is that you have to hold a license in your state of residence. So that's where you live, where you're domiciled the majority of the time. It's where you vote. where your driver's license is from. So that's what your home state is for purposes of the compact. So it doesn't necessarily matter where you hold a license right now, but it matters where your home state is, and that's who's going to be issuing the interstate compact license to you. But we'll talk about that more in section 4. Definition S, also want to touch on this starting in line 94, qualifying national exam. So we define that as the national licensing examination developed and administered by a national association of social work licensing authorities or other competency assessment approved by the commission. Now, you may be wondering, that sounds a lot like the ASWB exam. Why don't you just say that? And there's a lot of reasons for that. Namely, it's not best practice to tie the interstate compact to any one entity or any one requirement that could change in the future. So that having the definition be broad like this, a qualifying national exam, where we're defining it to be a national licensing examination, but we're not explicitly saying the ASWB exam, because what if in 20 years there's a new exam out there that states are using? And so we're giving the commission a little bit of flexibility to be able to foresee changes in the future. Or what if ASWB changes their name in the future? We don't want to have to rewrite the compact from scratch. So that's why we tend to keep things more broad in this legislation. Definition T, regulated social worker. So we say that the regulated social worker is any clinical master's or bachelor's social worker licensed by a member, regardless of title used by that member state. So regardless of what state where your license calls that license, because there's a lot of different names out there, there's a lot of different credentials and titles, we're using this umbrella term for purposes of the compact, regulated social worker. It's also important to note here that we are attempting to combine all 3 categories of practice into one compact. So this compact would cover clinical social workers, MSWs, and BSWs, all under this umbrella term, regulated social worker. So that's the term that you'll see throughout the compact. We didn't want to use a licensed social worker because some states don't even call it a license. They call it a certification or a registration or something like that, even though for legal purposes, it essentially is a license. Okay, so that is those are the main definitions that had the most significant discussion with our drafting team. So wanted to specifically call those out for your attention. But again, I would encourage you to go back and review all the definitions if you have time. Section 3 is the state participation section in the compact. So don't confuse this with the practitioner participation. That's all the licensee requirements. These are requirements that the state has to meet. So these are not licensee requirements. These are your state requirements. In order to be eligible to join the compact, the state has to do the following things. So number 1, they have to license and regulate clinical master's or bachelor's category of social work practice. This is not saying that you have to license all 3. It's just saying that you have to license one of the 3. So if your state licenses clinical social work and master's, but not bachelor's practice, then if your state joins the compact, you could get an interstate compact license at the clinical level, at the master's level, but not the bachelor's level. So it's not an all or nothing thing where you have to license all 3 of these categories. Whatever your state is currently regulating, as long as they're regulating one of these 3 categories, then your state should be eligible to join based on this provision. Number 2, require applicants for licensure pass a corresponding qualifying national exam for the category of licensure sought. So this, again, according to our definition that I just shared, is the ASWB exam. It's the only national licensing exam out there, so it can only be the ASWB exam. So this is just saying that your state has to require the ASWB exam for licensure. So if your state does not require the ASWB exam for licensure, then your state would not be eligible to join. The majority of states do, and so it shouldn't be a big issue for most states. Number 3, require applicants for licensure graduate from a program that is accredited. And then there's some language here about the accrediting agency being recognized by CHIA and the Department of Ed. So it's basically just saying accredited social work program corresponding to a category of licensure sought. So again, that's a BSW degree for the bachelor's practice, MSW degree for master's, and a clinical degree for the clinical practice. And that's from an institution that's accredited by an agency recognized by CHIA and the U.S. Department of Ed. Number 4, require applicants for clinical licensure complete a period of supervised practice. This is not saying a specific amount of supervised practice. It's just saying that you have to have some sort of requirement for supervised practice at the clinical level, not the master's level or the bachelor's level, but just the clinical level. So it doesn't matter if your state requires 3,000 hours or 4,000 or 5,000, whatever it is, as long as they require some sort of period of supervised practice, you should be eligible, or your state should be eligible to join based on this provision. There's no specific hours amount here. Then lastly, have a mechanism in place for investigating, receiving complaints about licensees. All states have that. And then B are all ongoing obligations that the state needs to meet. So number 1, the state has to participate in the commission's data system. There's going to be a sophisticated data system that the commission houses that has information about licensees. So this would be whether or not your license has ever been disciplined, if you've ever been denied, your exam scores and transcripts. All this will live in the data system and the member states will have access to it. So this is just saying in order to be in the compact, you've got to agree to share data into that data system and agree to share it with the other member states. Number 2, notify the commission of any adverse action or the availability of current significant investigative information. So this is just saying that as a member state, you have to agree to share information with the other member states whenever you take a formal action against a licensee. So if the board suspends, revokes, fines somebody for an action taken in their state, they need to let all the other member states know about that. Number 3, implement a procedure for conducting a criminal background check. There's information here about what the state needs to do with that background check. Number 4, comply with the rules of the commission. We're going to talk about this later in the rulemaking section, but the commission's going to have the power to write rules because a lot of things that come up in the administration of this compact are too narrow, too specific to address with the compact statute itself. And so you need to give the commission the power to write rules to more narrowly address things that come up. Number 5, require the applicant to obtain or retain a license in the home state and then meet the home state's qualification for renewal. So again, this concept of you've got to be licensed in your home state, your primary state of residence, and you have to meet that home state's renewal requirements to renew your interstate compact license. So this is a great benefit of the compact. You no longer have to do continuing education for all these different states. You don't have to pay renewal fees for a bunch of different states. You can just maintain one license in your home state, and that punches your ticket to practice in all of the other member states that are a part of the compact. Number 6, authorized licensees holding an interstate compact license to practice. So as a state, if somebody's coming to your state with another state's interstate compact license, you have to allow them to practice. And then number 7, designate a delegate to participate in commission meetings. C says that the home state can charge a fee for granting the interstate compact license. And that D says that the interstate compact license is going to authorize social work practice in all of the other member states. So again, you hold one interstate compact license and that automatically grants you authorization to practice in all the member states. So that is the end of section 3. Moving on to section 4. Here are the licensee requirements. So this is the requirements for you as a licensed social worker to be able to get an interstate compact license. So number 1, you have to, these are requirements for all social workers, regardless of your category of practice. So number one, you have to hold an active and unencumbered license in the home state. So again, you hold a license in your primary state of residence. That license is active and unencumbered. Number two, you have a social security number, qualifying exam number, or some other identifier. This is just to cut down on instances of fraud and make sure that you are who you actually say you are in the data system. Pay fees. Number four, meet continuing competence requirements established by the home state. Again, you only have to do renewal for your home state. CEs, renewal fees, only meet your home state's requirements. You don't have to worry about any of the other states that are in the compact, only your home state. Number five, notify the commission and the home state of any action taken by a non-member state within 30 days. So if you're moving from a state that's not a member of the compact and that state has some action against your license, then you've got to let the other member states know about that. Number six, abide by the laws and rules and scope of practice where the client is located at the time care is rendered. Now, this is an important concept, and particularly in social work because of the amount of telepractice that takes place. So while you're using the compact, you have to abide by the remote state's laws and rules. Wherever you're practicing, that's whose scope of practice you need to follow. That's whose laws and rules you need to abide by. So let's say I'm licensed in the state of Texas and I'm via telepractice seeing somebody in the state of Arkansas. While I'm practicing in Arkansas, that's where the client is located, then I have to abide by Arkansas's laws and rules. No matter what I'm licensed to do in Texas, I have to abide by Arkansas's laws and rules while I'm seeing clients there. And if there's things I'm able to do in Texas that Arkansas doesn't let me do, I have to abide by Arkansas's laws. And so that's defined by where the client is at the time care is rendered. Okay, subsections B, C, and D get into specific requirements for the different categories. So for the clinical category in B, we say in number one, that the clinical social worker must have passed the clinical category qualifying national exam. And then there's language here directing the commission to exempt those who were licensed prior to their state requiring the ASWB exam. So if your state, let's say you've been practicing for 20 years and your state just adopted the ASWB exam 10 years ago, then we don't want to make you have to go back and take the exam when you've been practicing for 20 years. And so we're directing the commission to write a rule to have some sort of grandparenting provision here for those type of social workers who have been practicing before the exam existed or before the exam was required. Then number two, graduated with an MSW or higher in social work from an accredited program. Number three, completed a period of 3,000 hours or 2 years of full-time post-grad supervised clinical practice. So if you think back to the state section, we did not have any specific hours requirement there, but in this section, in the practitioner section, we do. So we are saying that the licensee has to have completed at least 3,000 hours of postgraduate supervised clinical practice. The majority of states are at least at 3,000 hours, and some are even more than that. So the drafting team felt comfortable putting this here because of the uniformity that we saw in the states. There's only 2 states, I think, New York and Florida, that are beneath 3,000 hours. So in those instances, social workers would just need to provide evidence that they've completed 3,000 hours, even though their state requires less than that for licensure. Okay, C and D are very similar. C is master's category. Again, number one, pass the master's category qualifying national exam. Same provision here at the end about people who were licensed prior to their state requiring the qualifying national exam, the ASWB exam. Number two, graduated with an MSW or higher in social work from an accredited program. And then D, bachelor's category. Number one, passed the ASWB bachelor's exam. and graduated with a BSW from an accredited program. E again states that the interstate compact license is subject to the renewal requirements of the home state, and that the regulated social worker needs to maintain all the requirements in subsection A here. F says that the social worker services while they're practicing in a remote state are subject to that member state's regulatory authority. So in my previous example, I'm licensed in Texas, I'm seeing somebody in Arkansas. Arkansas has complete jurisdiction over me. The Arkansas Social Work Board can discipline my ability to practice in Arkansas, and I'm under Arkansas's laws and rules like we've already talked about. G and H talk about what if there's some sort of discipline action or encumbrance. If the home state license is encumbered, then the social worker's ability to practice in all other remote states is going to be deactivated until that home state license is no longer encumbered. And then if your ability to practice in a state is encumbered by one state, that your ability to practice in other member states may also be deactivated until that initial authorization is no longer encumbered. So that's a confusing one, and I'll talk more about that in the adverse action section. And then I, nothing in this compact is going to affect the requirements of a member state for issuance of a single state license. So like Keith said, this is an alternative pathway. This is not superseding the existing system in your state. We're just creating a new pathway for practitioners who want to be mobile. You can always go to your state board and just apply for a regular old license like you do right now. Okay, section 5 outlines a expedited licensure exchange process if you're moving between two member states. So we've talked about this requirement of you've got to be licensed in your home state. Well, what if you want to change your home state? What if you want to move to another state that's a member of the compact? So section 5 outlines a process for where you essentially exchange one interstate compact license for another. So if I'm moving from my home state of Kentucky to the state of Arizona, I tell the Kentucky board I'm moving, they deactivate my Kentucky interstate compact license. I tell the Arizona board I'm moving to Arizona. The Arizona board issues me their interstate compact license, and it's a seamless exchange process with no extra applications or requirements needing to be met. I will note here, this section is an opt-in for states. This is not a requirement that the states have to do this, but they are able to do this if they choose to do so. So the drafting team felt like it was a little bit heavy-handed of us to force states to license somebody that has not gone through their state-specific process. And so we left this as an optional provision that states can opt into. Section 6 details a provision for military families. Like Keith said, DoD cares about licensure mobility for military spouses. So what this says essentially is that active duty military personnel and their spouses can designate a home state and retain that home state designation throughout their active duty military service. So let's say the military spouse is licensed in the state of Georgia and they make Georgia their home state for the compact. No matter where they move, Georgia is always going to be their home state for purposes of the compact. So it does not matter where they move, they retain that home state designation. Section 6 outlines the adverse action process. So what does a home state have the ability to do to the interstate compact license? What does a remote state have the ability to do? So essentially how this process works is that your home state retains exclusive control and authority over your interstate compact license. Because if you remember, they're the ones that issued it. So if my license is issued by Kentucky, Kentucky retains control over it. They can discipline my interstate compact license. What a remote state has the ability to do is take action on what we call multi-state authorization to practice. This is basically just your ability to practice in a remote state that's granted to you through the interstate compact license. So if I'm licensed in my home state of Kentucky and I'm seeing clients in Indiana, Ohio, and West Virginia. Indiana, Ohio, and West Virginia have the ability to take action against my authorization to practice in their state. So Indiana can say, you took this action while you were in Indiana. We're going to suspend your authorization to practice or encumber it in some way or fine you. Any action that they're able to take against the licensee, they can take against my authorization. And so that's how that works. Remote state retains the ability to control the practice that occurs within their borders and take appropriate action to protect public health and safety. But what a remote state cannot do is take action on the interstate compact license because they did not issue it. Only your home state can do that. So Section 7 outlines that whole process. Okay, this is where we're going to start moving quickly. Section 8 establishes the Social Work Licensure Compact Commission. The most important thing to point out here is in B2. Again, remember the commission is just the governing body that administers the compact. It's made up of all the member states. So every state gets to elect one person to sit on this commission. And we say that the designee from each state is going to be either a current member of the state licensing authority who is a regulated social worker, or a public member, or an administrator of a licensing authority or their designee. So there's kind of three categories of people here: a board member who is a licensed social worker, a board member who's a public member, or a board member who is an administrator or their designee. So this section is long because this is a joint government agency that's being established. There's a lot of detail here about their powers, their duties, how they're supposed to meet, their organizational structure, how they're financed, establishing their qualified immunity. So I'd encourage you, if you're interested, to review that on your own time. It's too much to get into on a broad overview like we're trying to do today. Section 9, again, outlines the data system. The compact is going to house a sophisticated information system that all the member states have access to. You can see here the type of information that you're able to, that the member states will have access to. So mostly information about discipline and license history. Section 10, I talked about how the commission is going to have the power to write rules. So Section 10 establishes the commission's rulemaking power. There's things that come up in the administration of this compact that are better left to rules because rules can be easily amended rather than changing the compact statute itself, which is very, very difficult and not something that you want to do very often. Section 11, oversight, dispute resolution, and enforcement. So this section, just as with any other contractual agreement, there are provisions here for ensuring that all the parties of the agreement are actually implementing the provisions here. So if there's a state that's not holding up their end of the bargain, they're not adhering to the provisions of the compact, this process is in place for resolving those disputes, bringing that member state back into compliance so that all parties of the agreement are being treated equitably and are upholding what they agreed to by joining the compact. Section 12, effective date, withdrawal, and amendment. Most important thing to say here is in line 779, we say that the compact is going to come into effect when the statute is enacted into law by the 7th member state. So until we hit 7 states, we're just kind of in this limbo period where states are passing the compact, but it's not being implemented yet, and we're waiting to hit that threshold number, which the drafting team set at 7. There's reasons for why we chose 7, and we can talk about those during the Q&A. Also in this section, there are provisions for withdrawing from the compact and the member states collectively amending it if they chose to do so. The member states can also collectively sever the agreement if they chose to do so, just as with any other contract. And then lastly, Section 14, the binding effect of compact and other laws. this just affirmatively states that by joining the compact, all the provisions here that we've talked about are binding on your state. And if anything is conflicting with the compact is going to supersede that conflicting state law. And all the rules of the commission, all the provisions of the compact here are binding on all the member states who are agreeing to this contract, agreeing to enter into this legal relationship with the other member states. And so you have to uphold all the provisions that we've talked about here. So this just affirmatively states all of that. And that is the end of the social work licensing compact. So we went very, very quickly through those back half sections. Wanted to focus the majority of our time today on the front half. That's where most of the detail around social work is located. The back half is more about compact governance generally. So I will pause there, hand it back over to Keith, and would invite you to give us your questions in the chat.
Great, thanks so much, Matt. I'm going to put our contact information back up here on screen. Oh, that's the wrong slide. Sorry about that, everyone. Just a second. And hopefully that works a little better there. Now that we're into Q&A, I just want to highlight a couple of quick things. If you have questions that we're not able to get to during this session, feel free to reach out to us at that top email address, that's socialworkcompact@csg.org. If you're a part of a stakeholder group that, for instance, that we haven't had a chance to speak with yet, we have met with ASWB and ASW, CSWA, a few other groups, but you would like to hold a stakeholder review session with us, we can try to schedule that. It's pretty late before we reconvene the development teams, but please email either Matt or I, and we'll at least give it a shot to set that up. That being said, I see that there's a few questions in the chat. And so I'll go ahead and start answering some of those. I thought there was a hand raised, but I don't see that at the moment. So I'm going to go ahead and direct us to the first question I see in the chat from Sarah Wilder, who asks, what is the difference between states enacting legislation and the 7 states you were referring to?
Sure. So as we talked about, states join the compact by passing the model legislation that we just walked through. And so the 7 states, those are just the first 7 states to pass the compact. So those are kind of the founding members of the compact that then go and write the rules and the bylaws of the compact to actually start implementing it. And so the reason why you set that number a little bit higher is just there's several reasons. Political viability is one. Wanting to ensure that there's a good group of states at the table when you write those initial rules and bylaws is important. A compact between Mississippi and Wyoming is still technically a compact, but it doesn't really provide a whole lot of value. And so we set a threshold in order to actually start to implement some of this so that there's enough states at the table where this can really be politically viable and provide value to the profession. So hopefully that answers Sarah's question. And then I saw Ethan in the chat who was asking to ask his question over audio. So Ethan, yes, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I was the one with the hand up and I wasn't sure what I was doing. So my question is, one problem that I've heard with PsyPact, the psychological pact, is that clinicians or practitioners have to physically be located in their home state to practice. And that has been a major drawback for PsyPact. And I've heard a lot of problems with that. Is that the case with the social work compact?
So in terms of practice, no, you can be located wherever wherever you want and practice wherever you want, as long as the states are a member of the compact. In terms of obtaining that interstate compact license, though, that is in the compact, is that you have to be licensed by your home state. So wherever, Ethan, wherever you live, you'd go to your home state's licensing board, get that interstate compact license. But then once you have it, you can be wherever you want. You can see patients,
So if I'm
clients, wherever
licensed in the
you
state of
want.
Maryland, if I'm licensed, which I am, I'm licensed in the state of Maryland, but I'm
Sure.
on a trip in, say, Mississippi,
Mhm.
and my client is located somewhere else, do I physically have to be in Maryland because I'm licensed in Maryland, or can I be elsewhere?
No, you do not. You don't have to physically be in Maryland. You can
Okay.
practice from Mississippi, seeing a client somewhere else. Because if you remember where we talked about scope of practice, we defined that as where the client is located by at the time services are rendered. So as long as your client is located in a state that's a part of the compact, then that's what dictates. So it doesn't matter
Okay.
where you are, it just matters where the client is.
Right. Unless you're meeting in person, at which point, if you're meeting that client in Mississippi and Mississippi isn't part of the compact, that's a problem.
Okay.
Unless you're also additionally licensed in Mississippi separate from the compact.
Okay, great. That answers my question. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Let's see. I think Marcus Robinson had a question, and I'm seeing in the chat, will there be a certain area where a social worker can go to find out the laws of another state? Will that be something that they research on their own? This is an important question that we've received a lot from others in other sessions.
Yeah, so each of these compact commissions have a website, and a lot of times these compact websites will have information about the laws and rules of all the member states that are a part of the compact, especially if there's a jurisprudence exam requirement, things like that. I'd also say check out ASWB's website. They have a webpage that has links to all of the jurisdictional laws and rules. And so it does already exist on ASWB's website. In terms of the specifics for your situation, you'd have to go and actually dig through the laws and rules themselves on your own. Nobody's going to tell you you're allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do this. You'd have to do that research on your own. But there are resources out there for where you can find that information in one convenient place.
Yep. Also, I wanted to follow up because there was a follow-up in the chat to the initial question about sort of which states have enacted, or if states have enacted. And Carrie asked, I haven't read the whole thing yet. Are there already 7 states established? And I think it's important to clarify that this is still a draft. So this has not yet been enacted in any state. It's not even available to states to be enacted yet. There have been states that have sort of expressed interest. There have been states that, like, either a board member from the Social Work Licensure Board, or an NASW chapter executive director, or a social work educator from that state, something like that, has participated in the compact development. And so they might be able to sort of help move the bill along in their state, should their state be interested. But no, it's not available to states yet to enact because it's still in draft status. And that's what the stakeholder review process is about. And so hopefully that clears that up. But then also I see a question from Wendy McSparron. Hopefully I'm saying that right, Wendy. I apologize if not. But she asked, how can we find out if our state is considering participating in the Interstate Compact? And I guess, Matt, this is probably a good point to talk sort of about next steps in the state enactment process and how that will work.
Sure. So we always encourage people to consider kind of 3 avenues in terms of advocacy. So the first would be your state legislature. So I'd encourage you to write a letter to your state rep or a state senator and just tell them what your experience has been. If you want to advocate for the compact, I think personal stories often resonate with legislators. So if you've had a particularly burdensome process, maintaining multiple licenses or having difficulties moving and changing your license, that all goes a long way. And I think legislators really take that to heart when they're considering a bill. And so that's the first place I would encourage you to start, because that's ultimately the body that's going to make that decision for whether or not your state joins. It's an act of the legislature. And so your legislature has to be on board. I'd also encourage you to reach out to your licensing board, let them know that you want to advocate for the compact, and you could inquire if they've talked to CSG or talk to ASWB about it. And we're always happy to educate and provide resources for state boards. And then the last avenue would be like membership associations. So NASW and CSWA and the state chapters that are associated with those groups. Those groups go a long way, especially in the enactment phase, in terms of navigating each state's unique political process, finding lobbyists, finding bill sponsors, because they know individual states in their the political environment. So oftentimes they go a long way if they're supportive of the compact as well. So those are kind of the three avenues I'd encourage you to explore. You could inquire and see if they're interested in the compact, if they've heard about it, and if their state is likely to join. And then if not, just let them know that you would be supportive of your state being a member.
Great, thanks, Matt. We have another question from Latoya Griffin. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. If you are, and she asks, are you engaging the identity-based social work organizations? How diverse is the drafting committee of the compact, and what is being done to attend to representation of communities of color? She has concerns that the proposed makeup of the governing Interstate Compact Commission and board lacks attention to inclusion of communities of color, Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian American, Pacific Islander, etc. As many boards have historically not been diverse, this is important if part of the goal is protecting diverse communities. Diverse social work representation is important. Thanks for your question. And Matt, do you want to?
Sure. Well, we were certainly very mindful of diversity when we were putting together our development team, the technical assistance group, and the document team. Ultimately, at the end of this process, all of the people who participated, their names will be public if they consent to that. And we don't do it on the front end to protect them from getting lobbied. So we don't want them getting harassed with emails. You need to do this to the compact. You need to have this in there. And so that's why we haven't shared the list of names, but I can assure you that diversity was top of mind, and we have a really great group. In terms of the commission, CSG really has no role in what the commission looks like, and it's up to every state to elect whoever they see fit to sit on the commission. And so it's really would be difficult for us and challenging to get states to pass a compact that has strict parameters around who they can and cannot elect to sit on the commission. So we just leave that up to every state to make that decision, and CSG doesn't really have a role in that.
And I think that's an important sort of point of advocacy for the social work community upon, reaching the state enactment threshold, that, you communicate with your state board, if you're a state as a member, that I think it's important that the diversity of the social work profession be represented. And we'd like to see, this represented on the, whatever factors represented on the social work compact committee or compact commission. And so it's, your voice doesn't end at the end of stakeholder review. You can continue to discuss these issues with your state board and the commission. So we just encourage people to make their voices heard in that way. Let me see. I'm not seeing any other immediate questions in the chat. So I see a hand raised there.
Hi, this is Carrie again. I'm sorry, I'm distracted by the other questions. I am very excited about this possibility. I have, I work for an organization. Also, I guess one question is, I work for an organization that has clinicians in numerous states. Do you have companies that you're, I mean, I guess you don't target anybody, but is there a way to get buy-in from some of these organizations that have, my company has grown a lot since the pandemic in the world of telehealth?
So are you asking if part of the process we've been working with sort of like, I think there's like a couple of conglomerates that are like, I think BetterHelp is one, and then there's a couple other companies like that. The answer is no. We have not been working with them directly, but we understand that the concern for social workers where there's other sort of mental health providers who already have compacts, and so we understand the importance of the compact and the compact development process to the social work profession. But the answer to that question is no, and that's mostly because we generally try to work directly with practitioners and licensees and the regulatory and licensure boards in the development process. We understand that, those groups will be affected by the final result, but that's something, and we're happy to hear from them. But the answer to that question is no.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I would say, I think that perspective is very valuable. And so I would encourage you to really take a good look at the draft that we have and give us your feedback, because that's kind of the perfect case study for who this compact is for, is people who are working in many states at one time. And so if your whole business model is kind of predicated on that, then you're like the ideal person that this is targeting. And so I'd happy to talk offline if you have thoughts about the compact. But yeah, I think your perspective would be very valuable.
Yeah, and then just one other follow-up, and then I'll stop, is are you gathering information or have information that I guess I can go looking for around similar relationships with states who have relationships with the states that border them? So I live in Minnesota right now, even though I have licenses in other states now. Are there states with these similar, I guess it's not a compact, but reciprocity with neighboring states?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we don't have that information currently. I think that might be something that that ASWB could help us out with if they don't already have that information. But yeah, I certainly think that could be a good starting place in terms of targeting particular states if they already have some sort of reciprocity or endorsement system in place. So that's a great suggestion, and we'll certainly take that back to our project team to dig into a little bit more.
It's also important to note that just because there's a compact, that states who already maintain reciprocity agreements, so for instance, like, I don't know if Minnesota and Wisconsin maintain reciprocity agreements, states can continue to maintain those reciprocity agreements, even for single state licenses. This is just an additional sort of pathway.
Thank you.
See one other hand raised, Sarah?
Hey, yeah, I wanted to ask a question that I had typed early on about how does the compact, how does it correlate with the insurance and billing systems within different states?
So fortunately, this issue has been solved by previous compacts that also bill insurance. So professions like PT, occupational therapy, speech therapy. So interstate compact licenses, compact privileges are recognized by groups like CMS and insurance providers as being equivalent to a license, essentially. So your interstate compact would be recognized by that insurance provider, and you'd be still able to bill insurance for your services. It's not addressed in the compact language itself, but especially with like Medicaid. Their Medicaid has issued a assessment about this issue and said that they're gonna make sure that compact privilege holders, interstate compact license holders are able to bill Medicaid for their services. So.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, it's just past 4 o'clock, and I know that we said we'd be here for an hour, and so we want to be respectful of everyone's time and let you back to the rest of your afternoon. I'm not seeing any additional questions or hands raised, so I think we'll be wrapping things up. Again, if you have further questions that we didn't get to today, feel free to email us at that email address, socialworkcompact@csg.org. Again, I want to reiterate the importance of the stakeholder review survey. So Grant earlier in the chat added the link to the survey. So please feel free to, after this, if you have other questions, please feel free to send us an email. But once you think you have all the information you need, we encourage you to fill out that survey. And so other than that, we plan to reconvene the compact development teams in the coming weeks and review the draft based on everyone's feedback. Stakeholder review is a really critical phase of the compact development process, and we really appreciate everyone's time and involvement in that process. And so thanks again for the opportunity to share about the compact. We appreciate your time and interest. We're going to wrap things up and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thanks.